Atheists don't often know how to speak or communicate meaningfully, so they just tap dance around certain topics. I'll show you this as we go through the video. I have quite a bit to cover, so let's get straight into it. If you enjoy content like this, drop a like, subscribe, and hit the bell to be notified when part 3 drops. Welcome to Veritas. Atheists will sometimes use the term evidence and proof interchangeably. However, the sin that atheists are most guilty of is shifting the goalpost without even understanding the goal to begin with. When atheists are pushed after being given evidence enough, they would say something like, "Only scientific, empirical proof counts as evidence." The problem with that statement is that not even science works like that. We accept that other minds exist, we accept that past events actually happened. Moral truths do exist. Mathematical truths and logic itself are all accepted without empirical scientific proof. Science itself presupposes non-empirical truths in order to even exist. So the question then becomes, what sort of evidence is appropriate for God? A question they can't even answer themselves. So first, we need to agree on what evidence and proof means before we can move on. Evidence is data that increases the probability of a claim. Proof is a logical certainty that's mostly limited to math and formal logic. This is the problem that atheists find themselves in. They often demand proof of God's existence, which literally nothing in existence has. You can't prove your partner loves you, you can't prove that Julius Caesar crossed the Rubicon, you can't even prove the Big Bang. Denying all of these things, they would consider irrational. When atheists demand proof, they contradict their own position in science. There is little to no proof of anything outside of mathematics. The question isn't if there is proof, it's if there is good evidence, which yes, there are some. The first philosophical piece of evidence is the contingency argument. Why does anything exist at all? Everything begins to exist, which was once rejected by science. Everything is dependent on something else, another fact that was once rejected in science. If we look at the universe itself, we can clearly see that it had a beginning and that it is contingent. You cannot explain a chain of contingent things using the chain of contingent things. So either something exists necessarily, uncaused, eternal, or it doesn't exist at all. Atheists has to admit at this point that the universe just exists for no reason at all, which is a cop-out and a lazy excuse to give up. The only most probable answer is a necessary, eternal, and non-material cause, which is exactly what God is. Any other answer simply is a cop-out, or it's just irrational. The second philosophical piece of evidence is the fine-tuning argument. Most everyone knows this argument, but for those who don't know it, gravity, the cosmological constant, and the strong nuclear force are examples of systems that are so perfectly tweaked for this universe and even life that the odds for it existing are not just unlikely, it's astronomically absurd for these values to arise by coincidence. There are a few explanations that could answer this problem. The first is necessity, basically saying that the constants couldn't have been any other way, which is a lie. Physics allow for variations to exist. The second is where most atheists will fall, which is chance. The argument is that, well, everything exists, so we likely just got impossibly lucky, which is just another cop-out because they don't like the only last conclusion. The third and final option is design, that the universe is intentionally structured, which can only be done by an intelligence outside of the physical laws of nature. The joke is that atheists will sometimes invoke the multiverse theory to escape design, but there is no empirical evidence of a multiverse and it's purely accepted to avoid God. It's ironic how they deny God but accept an unobservable infinite universe generator. The third argument is about consciousness and reason. When we observe matter in motion, it gives you mass, energy, and chemistry. It does not logically produce subjective experiences, rationality, intentional thought or meaning. Then based on this alone, if your thoughts are the results of blind physics, then you don't hold beliefs because they are true, you hold them because neurons fired in your brain. This kind of defeats atheism itself, since rational belief becomes impossible under those restrictions. So if atheism is true, you can't trust your own mind that atheism is true anyway. There is also the argument from objective morality. Everyone, including atheists, almost always believe that right is wrong, torturing children is wrong, and genocide is wrong. However, any moral system under atheism relies either on evolutionary preference or social agreements. Under this worldview, the Austrian painter, whose name shall not be named, wasn't wrong, he was just unpopular. Slavery wasn't wrong, just outdated. There is not a single moral claim you can justify as an atheist. If there is an objective moral law, it implies there is a moral lawgiver. There are a lot of different arguments that does count as evidence, each one very insignificant on its own, but as you stack them, the probability grows. Once you put all of the philosophical evidences on top of each other, it's more probable that God exists than doesn't. This would mean that atheists are supposed to cream themselves, as they always do when they say, science doesn't prove anything, it just gives us the most probable model. Yet, when we give them the most philosophically probable model, they reject it outright. Quite ironic. Debates between atheists and Christians would be over much faster if they asked just one question. What would count as evidence for God? As this is where you will start to see the problem with new atheism. The answer you would usually get is that nothing would be evidence enough, which means they are being irrational and dogmatic. If an atheist says that they want scientific proof, they don't know how science or philosophy works to begin with. If they say that God appearing would convince them, then they need to explain why eyewitness testimony works for every other area of history but here. Even if God appeared to an atheist, I don't think he'll believe. That's not my personal opinion on atheists. It's what they've said multiple times themselves. Have a look here.
I don't believe in the Christian God. So if I heard a voice in my head that I thought was God, I would see that as a warning sign that I have a problem.
Even if there was this booming voice and the second coming in clouds of glory, the more probable explanation is that it's a hallucination.
Also, the extraordinary claims require extraordinary evidence. Then you would have to explain how the contingency argument, the moral argument, and the fine-tuning argument all came into existence by chance, because that is also a claim. To claim that it just happened by chance is still a claim. Atheists generally don't reject God based on a lack of evidence, but instead they often reject God because they would then be accountable. They had bad experiences with religion, they have a Reddit level philosophy experience, or they just simply confuse their dislike with disproof. Even Nietzsche himself, an atheist, said that it's not arguments that convince men, but a change in desires. So atheists who say that there is no evidence is philosophically uninformed, historically stunted, and scientifically confused like their sexuality. These people are often psychologically and or politically motivated to reject evidence outright. This goes out to all atheists. Remember one thing, it's fine to reject God, but be intellectually honest and say that you do not like the evidence, not that it's not sufficient, as there are various pieces of evidence that I did not cover that altogether makes God the only and best model to explain all of it in unity. Be honest and admit that you don't want evidence and you don't want to believe in God, because the evidence does exist, you just don't like it. Thank you so much for watching the video. This isn't a complete and comprehensive video that proves the existence of God. The only purpose of this video is to show that as rational and logical as atheists claim to be, there does exist evidence, whether they like it or not. So don't treat this video as me proving God, because I'm not. I'm making a different point. though I feel that I will be ignored, and they'll attempt to debate me on the existence of God in the comments now too. I hope that you enjoyed the video. If you did, drop a like. If you want to see more content like this, subscribe and hit the bell to be notified when I release the next video. Drop a comment down below and let me know your thoughts. If you make an effort, I might actually reply without sarcasm. I'm going to say this at the end of every video in this series. Also, always remember Acts 17:11. I am Brandon, this was Veritas, and have a blessed rest of the day.